Hello, hello, hello uh, to Mr. Clay Potter's History and Educational Mentoring. I start in the name of God with the pure intentions to educate our children for a better tomorrow. As I make these videos, if you like, uh, please subscribe, turn on the notifications, and comment because I would really enjoy to read and reply to your feedback. Okay. Uh, Today, we are going to be reading from Waves of the World, the second edition, A Global History with Sources. And this book is written by Robert W. Strayer. As an AP teacher, they changed the format several years ago, and we begin our AP journey in the year 1250. In this book, we're going to start reading part 3 in the book, The Age of Accelerated Connections, from 1500 or from 500 to 1500. And we begin. The big picture, defining a millennium. History seldom turns sharp corners, and historians often have difficulty deciding just one phase of the human story ends and another one begins. Between roughly 200 and 850 CE, many of the second wave states and civilizations, the Han Dynasty, China, the Roman Empire, Gupta India, Meroe, Aksum, Maya, Teotihuacan, and Mochi, experienced severe disruptions, decline, or collapse. For many historians, this marked the end of an era and the start of a new period of history. Furthermore, almost everyone agrees that the transatlantic voyage of Christopher Columbus, beginning in 1492, represents yet another new departure in world history. This coupling with the Eastern and Western Hemisphere set in motion historical processes that transformed most of the world and signaled the beginning of the modern era. But how are we to understand the 1,000 years, roughly 500 to 1500, between the end of the second wave civilization and the beginning of the modern world history? Historians, frankly, have some difficulty defining a distinct identity for this millennium, a problem reflected in the vague terms used to describe it: a post-classical era, a medieval or middle period between the ancient and modern, or, as in this textbook, an age of third wave civilization. At best, these terms indicate that where this period falls in the larger time frame of world history, but none of them are very descriptive. Third wave civilizations, something new, something old, something blended. A large part of the problem lies in the rather different trajectories of various regions of the world during this millennium. It is not easy to identify clearly defined features that encompass all major civilizations or human communities during this period and distinguish them from what went before. We can, however, point to several distinct patterns during the third wave era. In some areas, for example, wholly new but smaller civilizations arose where none had existed before. Along the East African coast, Swahili civilizations emerged in a string of 30 or more city-states, very much engaging in the commercial life of the Indian Ocean basin. The kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, simulated and sustained by long-distance trade across the Sahara, represented a new West African civilization. In the area now encompassed by Ukraine or Western Russia, another new civilization known as Kievan Rus likewise took shape with a good deal of cultural borrowing from Mediterranean civilizations. East and Southeast Asia also witnessed new centers of civilization. Those in Japan, Korea, and Vietnam were strongly influenced by China, like Srivijaya and the Indonesian island of Sumatra, and later the Angkor Kingdom, centered in present-day Cambodia, drew on the Hindu and Buddhist traditions of India. All of these represent a continuation of a well-established pattern in world history, the globalization of civilization. Each of the new third wave civilization was, of course, culturally unique, but like their predecessors, for the first and second waves, they too featured states, cities, specialized economic roles, sharp class and gender inequalities, and other elements of civilized life. As newcomers to the growing number of civilizations, all of them borrowed heavily from larger and more established centers. The largest, most expansive, and most widely influential of the third wave civilization was surely that of Islam. It began in Arabia in the 7th century CE, projecting the Arab people into a prominent role as builders of an enormous empire while offering a new, vigorous, and attractive religion. Viewed as a new civilization defined by its religion, the world of Islam came to encompass many other centers of civilization: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, India, the interior of West Africa, and the coast of East Africa, Spain, Southeast Europe, and more. Here was a uniquely cosmopolitan or umbrella civilization that came closer than any other had ever come to uniting all mankind under its ideals. Yet another and quite different historical pattern during the third wave millennia involved those older civilizations that persisted or were reconstructed. The Byzantine Empire, embracing the eastern half of the old Roman Empire, continued the patterns of Mediterranean Christian civilization and persisted until 1453, when it was overrun by the Ottoman Turks. In China, following almost 4 centuries of fragmentation, the Sui Tang and Song dynasties, 589 to 1279, restored China in imperial unity and reasserted its Confucian tradition. Indian civilizations retained its ancient pattern of caste or Hinduism amid vast cultural diversity, even as parts of India fell under the control of Muslim rulers. Variations to this theme of continuing or renewing older traditions took shape in the Western Hemisphere, where 2 centers of civilization in Mesoamerica and in the Andes had been long established. In Mesoamerica, the collapse of classical Mayan civilization and of the great city-state of Teotihuacan had by about 900 CE opened the way to other people to give new shape to this ancient civilization. The most well-known of these efforts was associated with the Mexica or Aztec people, who created a powerful and impressive state in the 15th century. About the same time, on the western rim of the Pacific of the South American was Quechua-speaking people, now known as the Inca, incorporated various centers of Andean civilization into a huge bureaucratic empire. Both the Aztecs and the Incas gave a new political expression to much older patterns of civilized life. Yet another pattern took shape in Western Europe following the collapse of the Roman Empire. There would be kings and church leaders alike sought to maintain links with the older Greco-Roman Christian tradition of classical Mediterranean civilization. In the absence of empire, however, new and far more decentralized societies emerged, led now by Germanic peoples and centered in Northern and Western Europe, considerably removed from the older center of Rome and Athens. It was a hybrid civilization combining old and new Greco-Roman and Germanic elements in a distinctive blending. For 5 centuries or more, this region was a relative backwater compared to the more vibrant, prosperous, and powerful civilizations of Byzantium, the Islamic world, and China. During the centuries after 1000 CE, however, Western European civilization emerged as a rapidly growing and expansive set of competitive states, willing, like other new civilizations, to borrow extensively from their more developed neighbors. The ties that bind, trans-regional interaction in the third wave era. These quite different patterns of development within particular civilizations have made it difficult to define the third wave era in a single, all-encompassing fashion. In another way, though, a common theme emerged for during this time, the world's various regions, cultures, and people interacted with one another far more extensively. More than before, change in human societies was the product of contact with strangers, or at least with their ideas, armies, goods, or diseases. In a various of places, island, Southeast Asia, coastal East Africa, Central Asia, Central Asian cities, parts of Western Europe, the Islamic Middle East, and the Inca Empire. Locally cosmopolitan regions emerged in such trade, migration, or empires had brought people to different cultures together for a restricted space. These many globalizations, both larger and more common than before, became a distinctive feature of third wave civilizations. None of these civilizations were wholly isolated or separated from their neighbors, although the range of intensity of cross-cultural interaction certainly varied over time. In limited ways, this had been true for earlier civilizations as well, but the scale and pace of such interactions accelerated considerably during 500 to 1500. Much of Part 3 highlights these intersections and spells out their many and varied consequences. One pattern of interaction lay in long-distance trade, which grew considerably during the third wave millennium. Along the Silk Road of Eurasia, within the Indian Ocean basin, across the Sahara, and along the Mississippi and other rivers, everywhere it acted as an agent of change for all of its participants. In places where such commerce was practiced extensively, it required that more people devoted their energies to producing more distinct market rather for the consumption of their own communities. Those who controlled this kind of trade often became extremely wealthy, exciting envy or outrage amongst those less fortunate. Many societies learned about new products via these trade routes. Europe's power of knowledge of pepper and other spices, for example, derived from Roman seaboard trade with India beginning in the first century CE. Such exchange amongst distant land also had political consequences on many new states or empires, were constructed on the basis of resources derived from long distance commerce. Furthermore, religious ideas, technology, and diseases also made their way along these paths of commerce, disrupting older ways of living and offering new opportunities as well. Yet another mechanism of cross-cultural interaction lay in large empires. Not only did they incorporate many distinct cultures within a single political system, but their size and stability also provided the security that encouraged travelers and traders to journey long distances from their homeland. Empires, of course, were nothing new in world history, but many of these associated with third wave civilizations were distinctive. In the first place, they were larger. The Arab Empire, which accompanied the spread of Islam, stretched from Spain to India. Even more extensive was the Mongol Empire in the 13th and 14th century. In the Western Hemisphere, the Inca Empire encompassed dozens of distinct people in a huge state that ran some 2,500 miles along the spine of the Andes Mountain. Furthermore, the largest of these empires was the creation of nomadic or pastoral people. Earlier empires in the Mediterranean basin, China, India, and Persia, had been the work of settled farming societies. But now, in the 1,000 years between 500 and 1,500, people with a recent history of a nomadic or herding way of life entered the stage of world history as empire builders. Arabs, Berbers, Turks, Mongols, Aztecs, ruling over agricultural people and establishing civilization. Together, large-scale empires and long-distance trades facilitated the spread of ideas, technologies, food crops, and germs far beyond their point of origin. Buddhism spread from India to much of Asia. Christianity encompassed Europe and took root in distant Russia, even as it contracted in the Middle East and North Africa. Hinduism attracted followers in Southeast Asia, and more than any other religion, Islam became an Afro-Eurasian phenomenon with an enormous reach. Beyond the connections born of commerce and conquest, those of culture and religion generated lasting ties amongst many people in the Eastern Hemisphere. Technologies, too, were diffused widely. Until the 6th century CE, China maintained a monopoly on the manufacture of raw silk. Then this technology spread beyond East Asia, allowing the development of a silk industry in the Eastern Mediterranean and later in Italy. India, too, contributed much to the larger world, crystallizing sugar, a system of numerals, and the concept of zero, techniques for making cotton textiles, and many food crops. In the Americas, corn gradually diffused from Mesoamerica, where it was initially domesticated, to North America, where it stimulated population growth and the development of more complex societies. Disease also linked distant communities. The plague, or Black Death, decimated many parts of Eurasia and North Africa as it made its deadly way from east to west in the 14th century. A focus on these accelerating connections across cultural boundaries puts the historical spotlight on merchants, travelers, missionaries, migrants, soldiers, and administrators, people who traveled abroad rather than those who stayed at home. This cross-cultural emphasis on world history raised provocation questions about what happens when cultures interact or when strangers meet. How did external stimuli operate to produce change within societies? How did individuals or society decide what to accept and what to reject when confronted with new ideas or practices? In what ways did they alter foreign customs or tradition to better meet their own needs and correspond to their own values? Much of the readily visible action in the third world civilization as in all earlier civilizations, feature male actors. The vast majority of rulers, traders, soldiers, religious officials, and long-distance traders were men, as were most head of households and families. The building of states and empires, so prominent in the Third World era, meant war and conquest, fostering distinctly masculine warrior values and reinforcing the dominant position of men. Much of what follows in part 3 is frankly men's history. But it is useful to remember that behind all of this lay a vast realm of women's activity, long invisible to historians or simply assumed. Women sustained the family life that was the foundation of all human community. They were the repositories of language, religion, ritual, group knowledge, and local history. Their labor generated many of the products that entered long-distance trade route, as well as those that fed and clothed their communities. The changing roles of relationship of men and women and their communities and their understanding of gender also figured in the chapter that follows. And that is the end. Okay. If you enjoyed this reading, again, I would like for you to subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, and comment on any points or interests that you have in this section. We will continue on to Chapter 7, Commerce and Culture. And so I want to say that this video is sponsored by Mr. Clay Potter's educational mentoring and homework assistance. If you are interested in these services, write a comment and I will get in touch with you. Thank you very much and have a good day.